The dust kicked up by his horse's hooves had settled long before Jake Morrison noticed the small figure sitting on the weathered porch steps of the ramshackle cabin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Colorado Territory, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded him too much of better times. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, following a lead on cattle rustlers that had turned out to be nothing more than wind and wishful thinking. The child couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, her auburn hair catching the dying light like spun copper. She wore a faded calico dress that had seen too many washings and mending sessions, and her bare feet swung idly from the porch steps. But it was her eyes that stopped Jake cold. Dark brown eyes that held a weight no child should carry, eyes that had seen too much of life's harsh realities. "Mister," she called out as he approached, her voice clear but cautious, "can you marry my mama so she doesn't die sad?" Jake pulled his horse to a complete stop, the leather reins creaking in his weathered hands. In 27 years of living, 15 of them spent wandering the frontier after the war. He'd heard his share of strange requests. But this one caught him off guard, piercing through the armor of indifference he'd carefully constructed around his heart. "What's that now, little miss?" he asked, dismounting slowly. His boots hit the hard, packed earth with a dull thud, and he noticed how the child's eyes tracked his every movement, alert and wary like a young deer ready to bolt. "My mama's dying," she said matter-of-factly as if discussing the weather. "Doc Henderson from town says she's got the consumption, and it's eating her up from the inside. She tries to hide it, but I hear her coughing blood at night when she thinks I'm sleeping." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd lost his own mother to consumption when he was barely older than this child. The memory of those final months, watching a vibrant woman waste away to nothing, still haunted his dreams. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said quietly, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "But why would you want me to marry her? You don't even know me." The girl studied him with those 2 old eyes, taking in his worn but clean clothes, the Colt revolver at his hip, the way he held himself, alert but not threatening. "You've got kind eyes," she said finally, "and you stopped when I called out. Most folks just ride on by. What's your name?" "Child. Emma Catherine Whitmore. My mama's name is Sarah." She paused, chewing on her lower lip. "We don't have much money for medicine, and Doc Henderson says even if we did it might not help. Mama's getting weaker every day, and she spends her time staring out the window with the saddest look I ever did see." Jake glanced toward the cabin, noting the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. The carefully tended vegetable garden despite the obvious poverty, the way the porch had been swept clean despite everything falling apart around them. "Where's your pa?" Emma's face hardened, and for a moment she looked even older. "He ran off last winter when Mama started getting sick. Said he couldn't watch her die and left us with nothing but this old cabin and $20. She kicked at the dirt with her toe. Mama cried for 3 days straight. Then she got up and started trying to make a life for us." The weight of the child's words settled on Jake's shoulders like a familiar burden. He'd seen too much abandonment, too much suffering in his years drifting from town to town. After the war ended, he'd tried settling down once, had even gotten engaged to a sweet girl named Margaret in a little town in Kansas. But the nightmares and the restlessness had driven him away, leaving behind another broken heart and another failure. "Emma, I appreciate your situation, I truly do," he said carefully. "But marriage isn't something you can just arrange like that. Your mama and I, we don't even know each other. You could get to know her," Emma said with the logic of childhood. "She's real pretty even with being sick, and she's smart too. She taught me to read and write and do my numbers. She used to be a schoolteacher back east before she married Pay." Before Jake could respond, a voice called from inside the cabin. "Emma, who are you talking to out there?" The voice was soft but carried a note of concern, and Jake heard the breathlessness that often accompanied consumption. Emma jumped up from the steps, her small hand reaching out to grasp his sleeve. "Please don't leave, mister. Just meet her. You don't have to decide anything right now." Something in the child's desperate hope broke through his defenses. Against his better judgment, Jake found himself nodding. "I suppose I could use some water for my horse, and maybe a place to rest for the night, if your mama doesn't mind." Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Mama!" "There's a nice man here who needs water for his horse." The door opened slowly, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. Emma hadn't exaggerated about her mother's beauty. Sarah Whitmore was indeed lovely, with the same auburn hair as her daughter, though hers was pulled back in a simple bun. Her face was pale and drawn, her cheeks hollow from illness, but her green eyes held a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength. She wore a simple blue dress that had been carefully mended, and despite her obvious illness, she carried herself with grace. "I'm sorry about Emma," Sarah said, her voice soft but clear. "She's taken to talking to strangers since—" She paused, a slight flush coloring her pale cheeks. "Since her father left. Please don't feel obligated to stay." "Ma'am," Jake said, touching the brim of his hat, "I'm Jake Morrison, and I'd be grateful for some water and perhaps directions to the nearest town." "The nearest town is Millbrook, about 8 miles south," Sarah replied. "But it's getting dark, and there are mountain lions in these parts. You're welcome to water your horse at our well and rest in the barn for the night." Emma bounced on her toes. "Mama, can he stay for supper? We've got stew and there's plenty." Sarah's eyes met Jake's, and he saw the embarrassment there, the pride warring with practicality. He understood immediately. They probably didn't have plenty, but Western hospitality ran deep, even among those who had little to share. "I'd be honored," Jake said quietly, "but only if you'll let me contribute something. I've got some coffee beans and a bit of salt pork in my saddlebags." Relief flickered across Sarah's features. "That would be very kind." As the evening progressed, Jake found himself drawn into the warm circle of their small family. The cabin was poor but clean, furnished with handmade furniture and decorated with small touches that spoke of Sarah's attempts to make it a home. Emma chattered throughout dinner, telling stories about the animals she'd befriended and the books her mother had taught her to read. Sarah was quieter, but Jake caught her watching him with curious eyes. The stew was thin but flavorful, and the addition of his salt pork made it feel like a feast. Emma insisted on showing him her collection of smooth stones and bird feathers after dinner, while Sarah quietly mended a shirt by lamplight. Jake noticed how she tried to muffle her cough, how she paused frequently to catch her breath. "Emma tells me you used to be a school teacher," Jake said during a lull in the child's chatter. Sarah nodded, setting down her mending. "Back in Ohio, I taught children Emma's age and older. It seems like a lifetime ago now." "What brought you out here?" A shadow crossed her face. "My husband, Emma's father. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. We sold everything we had and came west." She glanced at Emma, who was busy arranging her stone collection. The dreams didn't work out quite as planned. Jake heard the pain beneath her carefully neutral words. How many times had he seen this story played out across the frontier? Families lured west by promises of easy wealth, only to find hardship and heartbreak instead. "Mama used to sing to me every night," Emma piped up suddenly. "She has the prettiest voice. Would you sing for Mr. Morrison, Mama?" I don't think—" "Please, Mama? Just one song?" Sarah's cheeks flushed, but after a moment, she began to sing in a voice that was soft and sweet despite her illness. It was an old Irish ballad about love and loss, and Jake felt something stir in his chest that he'd thought was long dead. When she finished, the cabin was filled with a profound silence. "That was beautiful," Jake said quietly, and meant it. That night, lying in the barn on a pile of clean hay, Jake stared up at the rafters and thought about the woman and child in the cabin. He'd planned to ride out at first light, to continue his aimless wandering across the territory. But something had changed during those few hours around their table, something he couldn't quite name. Emma's words echoed in his mind. "Mister, can you marry my mama so she doesn't die sad?" The child's desperate love for her mother, her willingness to ask a stranger for help, spoke to something deep in Jake's soul. He'd been running for so long, from the memories of war, from his failures, from the possibility of caring too much and losing again. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of decision. Jake was loading his saddlebags when Emma appeared at his elbow, her face anxious. "You're leaving," she said, not a question but a statement heavy with disappointment. "I have to, little one. I've got business to attend to." "What kind of business?" Jake paused, realizing he didn't have a good answer. What business did he really have? He'd been drifting for months, taking odd jobs here and there, never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections. The cattle rustler lead had been just another excuse to keep moving. "Emma, your mama is a fine woman, but she deserves better than a man like me. Someone who can give her and you a real home, security, a future." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "She deserves to not die alone and sad. She deserves to know someone cares about her before she goes." The simple truth of it hit Jake like a physical blow. Here was a child, barely old enough to understand death, who understood love and loneliness better than he did. Mr. Morrison. Sarah's voice came from the cabin doorway. She stood there in the morning light, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, looking fragile but determined. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Jake walked over to her, hat in hand. Up close, he could see the fever flush in her cheeks, the way she fought to keep her breathing steady. "I want to apologize for Emma," Sarah said quietly. "She told me what she asked you yesterday. It was inappropriate, and I've spoken to her about it." "No need to apologize, ma'am. She's just trying to take care of you." Sarah's smile was sad. "She's been trying to take care of me since her father left. It's not right, a child that young carrying such burdens." She paused, looking out at the mountains. "I know I don't have much time left. The doctor in town was honest about my condition. I just want to make sure Emma has someone to look after her when I'm gone." "What about family back east? None that would want a half-orphaned child with no money." Sarah's voice was matter of fact, but Jake heard the fear beneath it. "I've been trying to save enough to send her to an orphanage in Denver, but—" She gestured helplessly at their surroundings. Jake felt something crack open in his chest. What if there was another way? Sarah looked at him sharply. "Mr. Morrison, I won't have you feeling sorry for us. Emma had no right to ask what she did." "What if she had every right?" Jake said quietly. "What if a man who's been running from everything good in his life finally found something worth stopping for?" The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Sarah. She studied his face intently, searching for something. "You don't know me," she said finally. "You don't know what kind of wife I was, what kind of person I am. You don't know my flaws, my fears, my failures. I know you raised a daughter who loves you enough to ask a stranger to marry you so you won't die sad," Jake replied. "I know you kept this place together after your husband abandoned you. I know you taught Emma to read and write and see beauty in simple things. That tells me more about your character than a lifetime of courtship might." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes never leaving his face. "And what about you, Jake Morrison? What kind of man are you?" "A broken one," he answered honestly. "A man who's been running from his past for so long he'd forgotten how to stand still. A man who fought in a war that took too much from him and left him feeling like a ghost." He paused, gathering his courage. "But maybe a man who could learn to be better." Given the right reason, Emma had crept closer during their conversation, and now she stood between them, looking up at the two adults with hope shining in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to love me," Sarah said quietly. "I know that's not possible in such a short time. But if you're serious, if you're really willing to stay, then yes, I'll marry you, for Emma's sake if nothing else. And for your sake too," Jake said firmly. "Emma's right, you shouldn't die alone and sad. You deserve to know that someone cares, that someone thinks you're worth staying for." The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church in Millbrook, with Doc Henderson serving as witness and Emma beaming like sunshine itself. Sarah wore her best dress altered to fit her thinner frame, and Jake had traded his trail clothes for a clean shirt and his father's pocket watch. They spoke their vows quietly, seriously. Two people entering into a partnership built on need and hope rather than passion. The weeks that followed were both harder and easier than Jake had expected. Sarah's condition worsened steadily, but she faced it with a courage that humbled him. They talked during the long evenings, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Jake told her about the war, about the friends he'd lost, about the nightmares that had driven him to keep moving. Sarah spoke of her childhood in Ohio, her love of teaching, her dreams of the life she'd hoped to build out west. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something real between them. It wasn't the passionate love of storybooks, but it was something deeper. A profound respect, a growing affection, a partnership forged in the crucible of shared hardship. Jake fixed the roof, reinforced the porch, and used his savings to buy medicine that eased Sarah's pain if it couldn't cure her illness. He taught Emma to ride and shoot, skills she'd need in this harsh country. In the evenings, he'd sit by Sarah's bedside and read to her from the few books they owned, or simply hold her hand while she dozed. "I'm not afraid anymore," Sarah told him one evening as autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors. "I used to lie awake at night terrified of leaving Emma alone in the world. Now I know she'll have someone who cares about her. She'll have someone who loves her," Jake corrected quietly. "Both of you will." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Jakey, "I know it's not what either of us planned," he said, bringing her thin hand to his lips. But somewhere in these past weeks, gratitude and respect turned into something more. "I love you, Sarah Whitmore Morrison. Not because I pity you, not because I feel obligated, but because you're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I was capable of it anymore, after everything that happened. But you showed me that my heart wasn't as broken as I thought." Sarah passed away on a crisp October morning, peacefully in her sleep with Jake holding her hand and Emma curled up beside her. The child cried as any child would, but there was a peace in her grief that spoke to the security she'd found in those final months. At the funeral, half the town of Millbrook turned out to pay their respects. Sarah had made friends during their trips to town for medicine, and her quiet dignity had touched many hearts. Doc Henderson spoke about her courage, the preacher about her faith, but it was Emma who spoke the words that mattered most. "My mama didn't die sad," she said simply, standing between Jake and Sarah's grave. "She died knowing she was loved." Jake and Emma stayed in the cabin through the winter, learning to be a family in their grief. He taught her more about riding and shooting, about reading the weather and tracking animals. She taught him about making a house a home, about the simple joys he'd forgotten in his years of wandering. When spring came, they made a decision together. They would leave the cabin, too full of memories both beautiful and painful, and start fresh somewhere new. Jake had saved enough money to buy a small ranch near Millbrook, close enough to town for Emma to attend school when she was older, far enough out to give them room to grow. On their last day in the cabin, Emma found an old journal of her mother's hidden beneath some linens. The final entry, dated just days before Sarah's death, brought tears to both their eyes. "I never believed in fairy tale endings, but perhaps I was wrong. My prince didn't come riding up on a white horse to sweep me away from danger. Instead, he came on a dusty trail horse, bringing nothing but kindness and the willingness to stay. He gave me something more precious than rescue. He gave me love, dignity, and the knowledge that Emma will be cared for. If this is my ending, then it is a happy one indeed." Years later, when Emma was grown and married with children of her own, people would ask Jake about his wife, the woman who had changed his life so completely in such a short time. He would tell them about Sarah's courage, her grace, her ability to find beauty even in the darkest circumstances. But most of all, he would tell them about a little girl with eyes too old for her age, who had asked a simple question that changed everything. "Mister, can you marry my mama so she doesn't die sad?" The answer, he would say, had been yes, 1,000 times yes. Because sometimes the greatest adventures come not from running toward something, but from finally having the courage to stop running and build something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Emma kept her mother's journal and added her own entries over the years, documenting the life they built together on the ranch, the love that grew from sacrifice and choice rather than passion and chance. She wrote about Jake's quiet strength, his gentle guidance, the way he honored her mother's memory while building new traditions of their own. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the prairie, Emma could swear she heard her mother's voice in the rustling grass, singing the old Irish ballads that had once filled their little cabin with music and hope. The voice seemed to carry a message of gratitude, for a stranger who had stopped when called, for love that had conquered loneliness, for a child brave enough to ask for what her heart needed most. In the end, it hadn't been a traditional love story, but it had been a true one. A story of family forged by choice rather than blood, of love that grew from kindness and deepened through shared purpose. It was the story of a wandering man who found his home in the courage of a dying woman and the wisdom of a child who understood that love comes in many forms. And sometimes the most powerful form is simply the willingness to stay.